Welcome to another episode of Imperial Diecast. I am your host here, my name is Aaron, and today I thought I'd be giving you guys an introduction into this hobby of ours, which is collecting diecast model cars. With this video, I want to give some tips for people who are either new to the hobby and want to start a diecast car collection, or folks who want to grow their collection and are interested in starting a new scale. For someone who is new to the hobby, the two main questions you should be asking yourself is, first of all, what scale do I want to collect model cars in? And perhaps more importantly, how much money do I see myself ready to spend on this hobby over the next few years? Because you see, this is a hobby whose expenses vastly varies from collector to collector. And regarding the first question, to me scale is very important because it gives a sense of order to your collection. If the majority of your initial collection is already in a certain scale, then you might want to consider continuing to collect in that scale rather than starting a new one. But if you're thinking about starting a new scale, then let me take you through some of the most popular scales out there. Perhaps the most popular scale out there, believe it or not, is scale 143. Now, 143 is essentially a scale where the majority of models out there do not have any opening parts. Now, when it comes to collecting diecast model cars, another question that you should ask yourself, perhaps before choosing a scale, is whether opening parts is important to you. Do you get bothered if you buy a model car where nothing opens? Because if that is the case, then 143 is something I do not recommend to you because the majority of the models in 143 do not have opening parts. So one advantage, of course, of 143 is that they do not occupy a lot of space. You can buy 10 scale 143 models and put them in the same space where maybe 4 124 scale models would fit, or just 2.5 118 scale models. So when you really start growing your collection, you'll realize just how much space you can save by collecting in 143. So that's, of course, the biggest advantage of 143. Another great thing that 143 has going for it is the fact that if you are a fan of race car liveries, 143 is the scale you want to collect, because there is just like so many different race cars made in scale 143 with authentic liveries. So if you're a person who likes to collect that kind of thing, then 143 is definitely your home turf. Another advantage of scale 143 is the fact that the model cars often come in their own transparent display boxes. So you don't even have to bother with a display case. Their packaging often consists of like a very, very thin cardboard-like material that surrounds this transparent box. So all you need to do is to get rid of this cardboard-like material and you'll have a box that can be viewed from pretty much every single side because it's transparent. So the car sits in the middle, it's secured with the bolts at the bottom. It's a great way to protect your models from dust. So that's something that you should consider in when factoring the price. In terms of price, I wouldn't really say that you're going to save money collecting 143 because 143s range anywhere from a couple of euros for like the blisters of De Agostini, Ixo, Altaia, and companies like that, to essentially cars that cost 80, 90, and even like 140 euros and more depending on the brand. For example, LookSmart costs a ton of money for their 143 scales. Now, LookSmart also makes 118 scale models that only cost twice as much, so in my opinion, their 118s are more worth the money than their 143s. Which is completely incomprehensible to me, because I cannot imagine someone spending 140 euros on a scale 143 model, but again, that's just like my personal view on this matter. And I have seen those models. They don't look gobsmackingly amazing or anything like that. They have a high level of detail, but there are companies like Mini Champs that make 143 scale models which are in the 30-40 euros range, so they don't look any worse. So to me, that is just insanity. Generally speaking, 143 scale models can be had, as I said, from a couple euros, but that's a little bit rare. More in the range of 15 to 20 euros, and then of course if you think about the semi-luxury kind of model car makers like Mini Champs, like, of course there's AUTOart, there's AUTOart 143s, there is Hot Wheels Elite 143s. So they're all in the range of 30, 40, 50 euros, somewhere along those lines. But again, what puts me off 143 is the fact that on the majority of the models you cannot open the doors or anything like that. Now remember, when it comes to scales, the number is actually the opposite of what you think it is, which means the higher the number, the smaller the scale. So now that we were at 143, let's go down to the scale 132, 33, 34, 36, 38, and 40. And the reason why I'm mentioning so many different scales is because there's a company out there that actually makes models in all these different scales. And that company is called Kinsmart. Now, the good thing about Kinsmart is that it's relatively cheap. I mean, you can get Kinsmart models for just a handful of dollars, and that's also the most expensive that they can get. And at the same time, the amount of detail that they put onto the exterior is remarkable. Not only that, but Kinsmart cars usually have doors that open, and they also have a pullback mechanism. So Kinsmart cars are actually toy cars in the classic sense that you can gift it to a 5, 6, or 7-year-old. But at the same time, they also have enough details to still look like model cars. And speaking of scale 132, this is also an interesting scale when you want to buy model cars from China, like for example over AliExpress. There's actually a couple of Koenigsegg's, a GTA Spano, and a Lamborghini Veneno that are made by no-name Chinese manufacturers that even have functioning lights and stuff like that. So if you cannot afford the scale 118 versions of these cars, especially the Koenigseggs, which sell for like 400, 500, 600 euros by AUTOart, etc. This is a nice, cheap alternative instead of having nothing. Now let's take a look at another scale, which to me is obviously the best out there, but that's personal bias, and that is scale 124. Scale 124 is, personally speaking, the best compromise between the actual size of the car, the amount of details that are on the car, the opening parts, and the price. It's just the perfect combination, because you get a little bit of everything. It's like a jack-of-all-trades scale. Of course, the criticism that experienced collectors and I guess elitists will say is that scale 124 cars look like toy cars. But I disagree, because this really, again, depends on the manufacturer. To me, there are some very beautiful scale 124 cars out there, and the majority of them simply have this combination of being affordable, being relatively big, having opening parts, being relatively detailed, and all that combined make it the perfect scale for me. So let's talk 124 scale cars. There are several companies that offer scale 124 cars. Perhaps the most famous of them is Burago. Another company is Maisto. Then we have Motormax / Mondo Motors. Then we have Welly. We also have Rastar, and we have MZ models. We have New Ray, and I believe a couple of rare ones like Greenlight, Ertl, and stuff like that, but they're hard to get. The interesting thing about scale 124 models is that pretty much all these manufacturers ask more or less the same price. Of course, it depends on the country you live in and where you shop for 124 scale models, but where I live, which is in Europe, you can get them for anywhere between 14 euros a piece to 22 euros a piece if it's a little bit rare, like the scale 124 Welly Porsche 918 RSR concept, which has appreciated a couple of euros in price since it was released. And then, of course, another company that I forgot is Jada. So Jada is the other company, and they also make scale 124 models. 124 is also the scale for do-it-yourself model car kits. And the companies that make these model car kits are Aoshima, Fujimi, and Revel. Some people have made the mistake that when they order 124 scale cars, they have ordered a model car kit by mistake. So you always gotta make sure exactly what you're getting before purchasing something. Now, the model car kits are really something for experienced hobbyists, because not only do they require putting the car together with super glue and things like that, but they also require you to paint the car yourself. And you can't just do that with, like, the normal paintbrush and paints related to that, because those paints are not really gonna look good. What you need is an airbrush, and those things cost a lot of money. And you're also gonna need the special paints that you will put onto the airbrush. And you preferably are gonna need a garage to be able to paint them, because doing that inside the confines of your apartment is not good for your health. 124 is also a popular radio control car scale. But let's return to diecast cars for now. Now, the interesting thing about scale 124 models is that there are no luxury manufacturers in this scale. There are a couple of AUTOart models, of course, in scale 124, but they are slot cars, I think. They're quite rare. They don't have any opening parts. They have like pilots sitting inside, and it's just a handful of them out there. But generally speaking, there are no luxury brands making these 124 scale cars, with the exception of a couple of NASCAR cars that cost like 45 euros a piece or something like that. And Greenlight doesn't really make 124 scale anymore. They used to make a lot of American muscle cars from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So Welly is the only company that can be considered a luxury scale 124 car maker, although they charge the same amount in terms of price as Burago, Maisto, etc. And this is really where we need to talk about quality. The king of 124 scale models is Welly, no doubt. Welly makes some amazing scale 124 models. It's just amazing. Like, they even have door window panels. They have front wheels that when they swivel, they stay that way. And they have brake calipers and brake discs that rotate with the wheels. This is the kind of detail that is usually reserved for scale 118 models, but scale 124 Welly models, at least the newer ones, have all these features, which is amazing. And now Burago is starting to catch up on that. Which, again, brings me to the second place, which I would say is Burago, because the problem with Burago is that they always take the most artistic license when it comes to making their models. Like, this is something that you will notice when you start collecting model cars for months and even years, is that when you look at the Burago cars, they tend to be a little soft when it comes to the mold, like when it comes to the overall shape of the cars. They don't have hard edges and like clean lines the way that Welly cars, for example, have. They're just ever so like soft, I guess. That's like the only word that I can describe the mold right now. It's as if the mold where this die casting metal is cast into isn't as clean cut and like sharp as the ones from other manufacturers. So the details on the car body aren't as defined as on other manufacturers. This is less noticeable on the scale 118 Buragos, but on the scale 124 it does become noticeable, especially on their Ferrari models, which actually are the best in their entire range for scale 124. But even there you start noticing that. But still, I mean, apart from that, that's like my only criticism regarding Burago. They really do deserve the second place. And then after that comes Maisto. Maisto makes decent models. They are solid, they aren't flimsy or anything like that. The problem is that not a single one of their 124 scale models that I'm aware of have brake discs or brake calipers. And this is again something that you may not notice when you start collecting diecast models, because I know when I started collecting diecast models, I really didn't even know much about cars, except for the fact that that's a cool looking car, I want that, you know? And so I didn't really check whether a car has brake discs and brake calipers before buying. And even when it arrived, I didn't really notice that it didn't have any. So one of the first diecast cars that I bought was a Ferrari 458 when I started collecting in late 2015. It was part of a Burago shipment that was, I guess, an early batch, because they did not have brake discs and brake calipers, while the current 458 Italias made by Burago in scale 124 do have it. So I felt like I was cheated out of something. But I guess that's something Burago has repeatedly done on their Ferrari line. I mean, if you take a look at their scale 124 F12 Berlinetta, they have like an older version of that, which had a completely black interior. And the version that I was lucky enough to get has a tan interior, so makes a huge difference when you look at the cockpit and like the interior of the car. But anyway, so the point that I was trying to make about Maisto is that virtually none of their scale 124s have brake disc or brake calipers, and this is a problem that also some Buragos have. And then further down in terms of quality, we have Motormax / Monda Motors. I think they're the same company, but both of them are very flimsy in terms of like the wheels wobbling, no brake disc brake calipers, general paint flaws, or like the windshield not sitting entirely flush with the rest of the car body. But the interesting thing about Motormax and Monda Motors is that they make a lot of cars in scale 124 that no other company has made. So, for example, the Celine S7 is one of the classics, and no other company has made that. Welly hasn't made that, Burago hasn't made that, Maisto hasn't made that. Another one would be the SLR McLaren by Mercedes-Benz, which is again something that no other company has made. So if you want to have certain cars, certain exotic cars in scale 124, you have to get a Motormax. So for example, Pagani is another example. If you want to have a Pagani Zonda, if you want to have a Pagani Huayra, Motormax is your only option. Or you switch to another scale, of course. So while the downside of Motormax is the fact that they have terrible quality control issues, on the pro side, they do make some really exotic cars that you cannot get by any other manufacturer in this scale. And they actually do give some of their cars door window panels. So that's also cool. Then let's talk about Jada. Jada is a company that is perhaps best known for making flashy cars. We're talking about bling, pimp my ride kind of stuff. Huge 20-inch, 21-inch looking chrome wheels, with like gigantic rims, very thin tires. This is something that is probably off-putting to a lot of people. But on the other hand, there are some folks who love this kind of stuff. And I can understand that the flashiness is unique because no other manufacturer does that. So if you're into that kind of thing, Jada is definitely where you will get your heart's content of stuff. One good model that I can recommend made by Jada is their Fast and Furious series, where, for example, you can get the Nissan GTR in scale 124, which is really good looking. And considering that the silver Maistos are a bit rare these days, this would be a nice alternative. Or their Lykan Hypersport is also a fantastic model. And then you also have their Dodge Viper. The main reason why I like these models is because one awesome feature about Jada is the fact that they absolutely nail the metallic paints. There is no other company, not even AUTOart for scale 118, that manages to capture the metallic paint as perfectly as Jada does. Because virtually every other manufacturer just like puts in these metallic pigments all over the car and considers that metallic paint. Whereas what Jada does is they actually do a kind of a matte metallic finish, but that still shines evenly and homogeneously everywhere. One example I can think of right now is their scale 124 Porsche Carrera GT in silver, which just looks absolutely stunning. It's a kind of a silver that you will not see almost anywhere else. It's done brilliantly. I guess you would call it matte chrome if you could, but still, to me it's silver and it's just absolutely fantastic. And they've also done that on their Dodge Viper, so definitely check out Jada. They have a couple of models that are just amazing looking. Even their Camaro SS, at least to me, it looks pretty cool. But here's a problem that not only Jada but also Maistos have, and that is that their front wheels do not swivel. They do not turn from side to side. So if you're bothered by that, then of course these two companies are off-putting to you. But if you don't have a problem with that, definitely check out these two companies because they have some unique models. And then you have Rastar. They make a couple of interesting models like the Lamborghini Murcielago SV, which Burago also makes, but the Burago version has terrible looking headlights with like literally no detail at all. It's like just a piece of silver plastic, or like plain plastic in fact, while the Rastar version has the actual black tinted headlights and everything, which looks very realistic. And they even make one of the best scale 124 Lamborghini Reventons out there. Compare that to like the Motormax one or the Mondo Motors one. Of course, the Mondo Motors and Motormax one have door window panels, but otherwise are of a worse quality. And the Burago one definitely is, because it doesn't even look like the actual one, especially when it comes to headlights and the rims and all that. Anyway, I'm going to be doing some reviews on that, so check those for more details. But now let's get to the heart of the issue, and that is Scale 118. Scale 118 is, after Scale 143, the most popular scale that collectors around the world collect. And the reason for that is because all the luxury companies produce in Scale 118. So that means we're talking about Norev, we're talking about Mini Champs, we're talking about Kyosho, AUTOart, TSM, Automobile, Sunstar, Revel, Podi, which makes SUVs and other daily drivers, Pico, and then you keep like increasing in price. There's like BBR, there's MR, there's Frontiart, CMC, Exoto, like we're going up to 500, 600 euro territory here, so this is insane. But for that, their cars have like so many opening parts and like so many springs and everything on their engine, individual pistons modeled, it's absolutely insane. And this brings us back to a fundamental difference and distinction that we have to make in Scale 118, which is diecast models and resin models. The resin models are usually the sealed ones, which means even though they're Scale 118, nothing opens on them. And some of the brands that I mentioned earlier were resin models, such as MR, Pico, BBR, etc. There's people out there who are ready to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars per model for these sealed resin ones. I personally do not share that sentiment. I think that if I'm going to spend several $100s for a single diecast car model, it better have opening parts, as well as a whole bunch of other details, instead of, just having a fantastic exterior but being sealed. But again, this is something that depends on the individual. One advantage, of course, that the sealed resin models, and also all other high-end models have, is that they are, first of all, exclusive, which means that you only have like 100 or something of them made, sometimes even less, and owning them makes you feel like one of the very few people in the world that have this. And another perhaps more practical advantage of these models is that they don't really depreciate in price. If anything, they appreciate in price when they go out of stock, and then the second-hand market essentially becomes the first-hand market because there's nothing else out there. They also have like a leather base, and they have all these additional stuff like certificates and stuff like that. So this is really a niche market, but the people who go and are ready to invest the money into these models, they know what they're doing. So we shouldn't really criticize them, because if they don't like the model, they can always sell it for the same amount of money they paid for it. But anyway, let's start at the very bottom. So again, we have the same companies that produce Scale 124 also producing 118s, which means we have Motormax / Mondo Motors, we have Burago, we have Maisto, we have Welly, we have Jada. And another brand that I forgot to mention is Hot Wheels. Hot Wheels has made a few Scale 124 cars, but I would not recommend them. They're Ferraris, and their doors don't even open. But in Scale 118, Hot Wheels makes two types of cars. They make their regular Mattel versions, which are also called Hot Wheels Heritage or Hot Wheels Foundation, which are usually sold for 40-50 euros, around that price range, and if you're lucky you can get them for 30 something. And then they have their Hot Wheels Elite versions. The Hot Wheels Elite versions usually retailed for 80 euros. And I say retailed because Hot Wheels lost the Ferrari license. And what that means is that they are not manufacturing anymore Hot Wheels and Hot Wheels Elite models. And of course, because everybody wants the Hot Wheels Elite models, they are the ones that are going out of stock far quicker than the regular Hot Wheels ones. So those models that used to be priced between 80 and 100 euros are now appreciating in price from anywhere 110, 120, all the way up to 160, 200, etc. If you look at red LaFerraris and stuff like that. Red is obviously a sought-after color, so you're going to be more likely to find yellow Ferraris than red ones. and the yellow ones will be cheaper, and the matte black ones as well, but the red ones will always be a little bit costlier. So Hot Wheels is the brand that you want to, well, obviously, you're not even going to be able to avoid it if you want Ferraris, because between the years 2002 or something to 2012 or 2013, Hot Wheels had the sole Ferrari budget license. Because I believe in that time also Kyosho, MR, and BBR still had the license. But for affordable Scale 118 cars, Hot Wheels Mattel had the license. And that means that you couldn't get any Ferraris cheaper than 40-50 Foundation Heritage price or 80 to 100 Elite price. The difference between Elite and the Foundation slash Heritage slash Mattel is primarily noticeable by the fact that they have semi-raised windows. Some of them also have carpeting, or I think actually most of them have carpeting. And it's not so much the features that Hot Wheels Elite models have, but it's rather the features that the regular Hot Wheels Mattel slash Foundation slash Heritage are lacking. Because you see, Hot Wheels really artificially limited the cheaper versions of their models by, for example, sealing the trunk or sealing the hood and doing other stupid things like that to entice people or encourage them to buy their Elite line. But for people who just cannot afford that, especially if they want to have like half a dozen Ferrari collection or even more, because these 80 to 100 euros will keep adding up a lot, right? So for them, obviously, if they want to just get the regular Hot Wheels one, they somehow had it to be impeded. So Hot Wheels decided to seal these parts and just make like the doors open or something, which I find a little bit of a ripoff. But there are some Hot Wheels Foundation Ferraris out there that are done really well, which have all the opening parts, such as the 612 Scaglietti. That's like one example I can think of right off the bat. Or their 458 Italia, where also everything except like the rear engine cover could open, but the hood was made out of plastic, and the doors, I think, were also made out of plastic instead of die-cast metal. So that's another issue over there. Those Hot Wheels Mattel models where the hood was sealed at least have a hood made out of metal, so that's at least a positive. But if we move further up, we come into the semi-luxury territory. We're talking about Norevs, we're talking about mini champs. These start around 40-50 euros and then go all the way up to 120, 150, and so on. And this is also the price range of Kyosho. So Kyosho makes a lot of BMWs. If you like luxury BMWs, definitely check out Kyosho. As well as iScale. iScale is also another company that makes luxury BMWs. Mini Champs and Norev make primarily European cars, so if you're thinking about getting a rare Mercedes-Benz, like a sedan, for example, or a Renault, a Citroën, etc., then these two companies are definitely where you'll be getting your fix. Burago and Maestos generally focus on American cars, but also on Italian supercars like Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Porsches, etc. Next, let's talk about AUTOart. So AUTOart is a company that has pretty much been inflating its prices like crazy over the past couple of years. They started off in the 100 euros range, give or take. Then that became 150 euros. Then that became 200 euros. Then that became 250 euros. And now we're hitting 300, 400, etc. if you look at their Paganis on the special edition or whatever it is. Crazy. But still, all the new ones at least are just under quotation marks around the 200 euros range. 250 or something like that. The older ones can be had, if they're like not sought after, they can be had for 150 to 200. But there are a couple of Scale 118 AUTOarts that can be had for less than 100. So keep your eyes peeled for that particular price range. One example I can think of right now, which I can recommend to everybody, is the Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera by AUTOart, the first generation one. You can get that for 50, 60, 70 euros max. And that's the same price like the 40, 50, 60 regarding their Lotus Europa S, which is also a nice little model. And these come in their own display cases, which are visible from pretty much all angles, so you don't even need to put them in a display case. You can just put them on your shelf and have everyone admire them. So that's another advantage of AUTOart. Their products are divided into like a signature series, a performance series, and I believe an exclusive series, but I'm not really sure. And only the top of the line AUTOarts come with certificates of authenticity where they tell you exactly what number your model is and so on. And they give you a booklet regarding the company and the brand and everything. But the cheaper AUTOarts, they don't have any of that, but they're still very good quality models. And again, AUTOart and all these other higher end manufacturers, what separates them from manufacturers like Burago Maisto is, first of all, perforated grills. So they don't put like plastic pieces where the black grills and air intakes of the cars are, but they actually have perforation. The second obvious difference between a cheap diecast model car and a expensive diecast model car is carpeting. So if you look at the interior, you're not going to just find a plastic floor, but you're actually going to find carpet. And the same is also for the trunk of the car. Another difference between AUTOart and other high-end manufacturers and low-end manufacturers is the fact that if you look at the carbon fiber part of a car, you will see that on the AUTOart and on the other high-end manufacturers, the carbon fiber is actually glossy. It looks really amazing. This is something that you should see in person to really be able to appreciate it. On the low-end manufacturers like Burago, Maisto, etc., which also do a lot of diecast cars that have carbon fiber, they just make it matte. It doesn't really shine on them. So they might have the same carbon fiber type of texture, but it's still matte and not glossy. Then, of course, another very common thing is door window panels. And then you'll have seat belts that are made out of fabric with seat belt buckles that are made out of photo-etched metal, very thin. And speaking about thin, this is perhaps the one thing that advanced diecast collectors will notice, which is that if you look at these AUTOarts, etc., what separates them from Maistos, especially if you compare the same car model that both brands have happened to make, is how thin the AUTOart ones are. Like if you look at the steering wheel, on the AUTOart, they're thin and they're perfectly in proportion, whereas on Maistos and Buragos, they're a little bit thicker and look more plasticky and toyish. And this is also something that can be observed for the side view mirrors, the rear view mirror, etc. Everything is just thinner and better looking on an AUTOart than on a Maisto, where everything is just a little bit thicker and less realistic. But these are subtle differences that you usually do not notice. And let's face it, I mean, Maistos and Buragos are most of the time more worth their money than AUTOarts, because who would want to pay 200 euros for a car that on first glance doesn't even look that much better than a $20 Maisto? There are some AUTOart cars that are must-haves, I'll give you that. They're definitely worth the money. But some of them are just like completely overpriced. And then if you go like to BBR and MR territory, I just think, why are these companies not bankrupt yet? I mean, why do people spend 400 euros on a car which doesn't even have opening parts? Just because of the brand and because of the exclusivity, I guess. But still, it's just mind-boggling. That's the thing about the diecast car hobby, is that, just as I mentioned on the start of the video, this is something that you need to realize about the diecast hobby, which is it brings together people. It combines folks with very limited budgets and folks which can easily spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars on cars. So vastly different types of people all have this in common. But for most of us, where the money is a little bit tight and you have to like consider and make and plan your decisions, it's definitely recommendable to stick to budget manufacturers. And this is where I really can recommend the brand Welly. In scale 118, Welly is an absolute stunner. Just like in scale 124, in scale 118, it's just amazing. If you take a look at their Aston Martin DB9, this looks like an expensive car. But on second glance, you realize that it's just $45. It's not that expensive. It's of course more expensive than your run-of-the-mill Burago Maisto, but still, it just has so much better quality, and it can easily keep up with the more expensive ones. The only thing that it doesn't have is carpeting, so everything else on first glance looks the same as a Norev, a Mini Champs, etc. So I hope you guys got an idea of the brands and how expensive and how worth the money they are. So once again, factor number one when it comes to collecting diecast models is settling for a scale, because if you start collecting all over the place, then if you put your cars next to each other, they're just going to look awkward when one is bigger and one is smaller and so on. So once you've settled for a scale, consider the brands, consider how much money they cost. In my next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to tell you the advantages and disadvantages of scales. I've already glossed a little bit about it in this video where I told you about scale 124, scale 143, and I guess scale 118, of course, it has more detail than either of those scales, and all the luxury manufacturers are pretty much settled here and in 143. But in 143, I don't really see the difference, but in 118, you do see the difference, especially when you can open parts and you can look at the carpeting on the interior and stuff like that. So 118 is definitely where you really notice the difference between budget manufacturers and expensive manufacturers. But that being said, the budget manufacturers still have a lot of detail going for them. So 118 simply is a very detailed scale. But the downside is that it is a scale that can get very expensive very fast. And it's also a scale where you run out of space in your house, believe me. Because when you start collecting 118s, like if you have like 20 or 30, you suddenly do not know where to put them all. And the last thing you want to do is become a hoarder, where you like buy something and then you keep it in a corner of your room, unable to display it because you don't have the space, but you just wanted to have that car. Don't go down that path, believe me. Anyway, this was a very, I guess, chaotic and awkward intro. I'll try to keep myself more focused on certain topics in the next tips and tricks video. So I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this, and I'll see you next time.
Make the ground shake.